Thank you, Amy. I appreciate it. And hi, everyone. Great to have the opportunity to chat with you. So, as you mentioned, I am leading our Google business right now. Actually, until about 9 months ago, the 3 previous years, I was running the ecosystem and transforming the ecosystem for Accenture and the way in which we leverage and frankly, take advantage and weaponize it. And I wanted to spend a bit of time today as we see the pace of innovation of technology continue to accelerate. The pandemic is no exception, right? Old-fashioned companies are becoming technology companies. We're seeing software terms like product owners and agile scrums being increasingly used, not just in software development, but in business processes. And at Accenture, our clients are really wrestling with this 1, 2, 3 punch of this accelerating technology change, rapid societal cultural change in employees and markets, in the pandemic itself, which is highlighting the slightest cracks that any client has in agility in enterprises. And the thesis that I'm going to just spend a few minutes walking through today is that the only way a company can really work through this challenge is by heavily leveraging a broad portfolio of ecosystem partners. And I think the conclusions are that you can't go it alone. You can't outspend big tech. And this requires a whole different kind of discipline for a company to get their heads around to be able to execute it properly. And so, although many would say that human commercial ecosystems were maybe built at Grateful Dead concerts in the past, the tech community recognizes the Wintel partnership is the starting point of this. Really, it all started here. The modern PC platform, Andy Grove, Bill Gates, the x86 chips. DOS to Windows, right? Customers benefited with cheaper, standardized, easier to set up platforms. Developers had a platform to develop their applications and created hundreds of billion-dollar market. And Microsoft and Intel both became some of the largest companies at the time in the world. And it was all about driving orchestration to create 1 + 1 = 3. And then the next step of the journey of ecosystems was in mobile, right? Apple now has over 4 million apps in the marketplace. $170 billion of value get created in the ecosystem because Apple standardized on iOS and SDK. Google went even further to leverage the reach of data. And this dynamic squeezed out of the marketplace RIM and Symbian and a number of others because of the strength of the ecosystem that they created around them. And the next wave of this was really built around SaaS. Salesforce is a great example of this. Enterprise solutions. The Force platform that Salesforce deployed, and it drove an ecosystem of business revenues for developers and ISVs. And for every dollar generated by Salesforce, the market itself gets $4.50 to $5. So this evolution continues, and what we're seeing is really 4 new type archetypes around the way companies are leveraging their ecosystem. And the first one is I like to describe as software eats hardware eats software. Google and Ford just about a month ago announced a unique strategic partnership to accelerate Ford's transformation and reinvent the connected vehicle experience. And out of this, vehicles at all price points are going to be powered by Android with Google Apps and services all built in. Google Maps, Google Assistant, Google Play. What Ford's going to find and customers are going to find is an increased experience with more personalized services. And what Ford is going to achieve is really accelerated modernization of in-car product development, but also manufacturing, commercial supply chain management, experience of their own employees as this relationship expands out. Using Vision AI for manufacturing and employee training, a number of components around this partnership. And so at the end of the day, a company who is increasingly becoming technology centric, in the automotive industry in particular, they don't need to maintain kind of the clunky architecture. You've got a software lifecycle of months and a hardware lifecycle of decades. And that gap in between is one way we're seeing ecosystem move. So, that's kind of model number 1 that we're seeing quite often. Model number 2 is around things like geographic expansion. Now, this is a bit dated, but I really like this example of Starbucks and Alibaba. What Starbucks is trying to do is to get into China a couple of years ago. And instead of building out a payments model and a distribution model, Starbucks lifted the whole transaction infrastructure from Alibaba. They inherited the whole stack. They got 1 billion customers that were already on that transaction platform for contactless payments. And there's been a whole string of other ones, Singapore Airlines, et cetera, that are leveraging other companies' existing business architectures. And AWS happens to just have, or excuse me, Alibaba happens to have one that's been exposed as a set of business services that companies can use to deploy into China. Now, this creates an interesting dynamic. How far do you go? Can these platforms become frenemies? AWS is certainly one of those kinds of partners that a lot of companies are concerned about. How far do we go here? But this has been an interesting model around creating new specific business opportunities to expand into geographies. The third category I would say is defending. And these are clients and companies where we're seeing, if cloud native is the goal, these are sort of the cloud immigrants, perhaps. And these are digital natives kind of coming in with and helping existing companies in working in partnership to disrupt their own business model. Amazon's been really disruptive in retail, and you're seeing Walmart, companies like this, partnering with companies like Microsoft and Google themselves. Now, they were fortuitous, Walmart was, to really jump on this and strike these partnerships prior to the pandemic. And they're one of the few retailers that really benefited from it. If you look at their most recent announcement, same store sales grew about 9%, which is not surprising for retailers during the pandemic last year. But their online sales grew by 79%. And it was really helping. This partnership gave Walmart the infrastructure, the capabilities. They didn't have to invent a lot of these structures to be able to make their investments in the right places. And that journey enabled them to take the mutual investments that Walmart could never have made, the level of investments that Microsoft could make. And so it was really about competing and defending. So that's the third big model that we're seeing. And the fourth is what I would call disrupting markets. In health, which has been a topic of today, right? Data is one of the most challenging aspects of managing healthcare today. And so Truveta, which is just a startup, really just formed a week or two ago by 14 of the largest US health systems, represents about 13% of the hospitals. And the goal really is to combine anonymized patient records to build a huge database with data from tens of millions of patients. And researchers can pay to access this data and use AI, ML to look for patterns in medical history and medical records. And there's a lot of value in these kinds of constructs because it enables a network effect. It enables an ecosystem of peers, and sometimes peers and technology providers, to work together to create a different kind of disruptive business model and create value in new ways. And we're seeing a lot of this in healthcare in particular because it's difficult for any one company, any one healthcare provider, payer, et cetera, to be able to shift the market. And in some places, governmental forces aren't driving it. And so these ecosystem partners are starting to forge alliances and partnerships in ways that can start to leverage that out. So, these are four interesting patterns. And what I would say is that we're seeing that these ecosystems are really critical to being able to drive disruption and taking a pivot into the new, as we call it, the wise pivot. This allows, these kinds of pivots will require and allow new markets to get created using the collective ingenuity of ecosystems. And we see this around four components of effort. The first is we're seeing is essentially transforming the core. And a lot of companies have gone down this path now. It's really kind of doing digital on the side, which doesn't have an effect. It's really doing digital at the core, freeing up capacity, putting in automation, analytics, insights kind of into the core businesses that our customers have. The second piece is around growing the core with these ecosystem partners. So this is where you can start to layer innovation on top of some agility that you've created, decoupling some of the core end systems. So if you're, an old hardware company, put decoupling around the core legacy solutions that you have in your enterprise to be able to create agility, data-driven responsiveness, things like that. And the companies that have done this pre-pandemic, we're seeing a lot better resiliency in their business because they're able to see problems and make adjustments more quickly. The third step is on scaling the new. And this is about being able to create new businesses on top of that core, right? Being able to go attack new opportunities and disrupt the marketplace yourself as a client. And all of these dimensions really come into being able to drive a wise pivot for the business. So using product, using software, using engineering as an output of companies. L'Oreal is a great example of a company that makes cosmetics. They have a significant product development. They use a lot of data. They've created a whole different kind of interaction with consumers that enables them to better position their product and actually be able to provide services through that channel, like color selections and things like that. And being able to take advantage of these capabilities to get value out of the marketplace and unlock that value has been a key piece of companies that have made this pivot successfully. And they've all had to be able to do this. They've all required leverage of the ecosystem to be able to truly exploit this opportunity. And capturing this trapped value, the gap between what's possible and what's being achieved, is really the goal. So why is the ecosystem so important for this? Well, a couple of data points I want to give you, and I actually just updated these a few days ago. The combined annual R&D of the five, big tech companies, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft, is 126 billion. 126 billion. This is, roughly 20% of the combined G1000 spend for R&D. Multiples of any other company. None of us can match this kind of number, right? This is R&D that's going into core enabling technology that any one of us would be silly to try to create on our own. VC funding, 140 billion in 2020, tech investments. Again, amazing sources of funding. IPOs, massive explosion this year in IPOs. This is just the North America market, or just the US market, I should say. The IPO value for the year, largely driven by this spike in SPACs, 174 billion, all-time high. And PE funds, over 200 billion in assets, right? This is a level of investment power in engineering R&D that no single enterprise could possibly match, in being able to take advantage of this. And this is, as a company who needs to be able to leverage our own ecosystem significantly in Accenture, we recognize that this is a level of spending that we also cannot match, and we want to be able to take this into the market ourselves as well. So the key that, I'll sort of use Accenture as an example now and turn inwardly a bit. We are moving collectively from experimentation, build it yourself, and individual point solutions to much more comprehensive partnerships and platforms in Accenture. And our assertion is that companies need to make bets in these ecosystems. It's not product selections anymore. These are partnerships around the future direction that you as a business take. And some of these companies might choose to directly compete in the competitive market they're in, which we're seeing, retail and AWS is one sort of trodden case study. And to be able to unlock this value and to be able to take advantage, the formula that Accenture has taken on is I think instructive for some, right? I invested heavily over the 3 years that I was in this role in building capabilities to build this muscle movement. It's not just engineering, it's go-to-market motions, it's business development and solution development, putting in product owners. We've been investing heavily to scale up key partnerships. And one of the reasons I jumped into this Google relationship is that we made a lot of investments into making that happen. And now I'm out in the market driving that in the world. It's a really important corporate discipline for years to come for companies to make. And it is something that beyond just kind of an engineering discipline, having a business learn to think about technology platforms, technology providers as business partners. For a lot of engineers, it makes a lot of sense, but for a broader business, oftentimes it's an unnatural position for companies to take. And I highly endorse it, and we've found a ton of power from it. And so my ultimate conclusion is that, with ecosystems, you can unlock exponential innovation from your business and be able to capture a lot of value that you otherwise could not do. And our research has made this very clear. You can't go it alone. These network-powered ecosystems have never been more important to unlocking value and innovation. And the partnerships that you forge, the technology that you ingest, the partners in the market, maybe even your peers as your businesses that you partner with, will accelerate transformation, create additional competition strength for you, and most importantly, drive the epic disruption. So thank you.
Awesome. Tom, we did have a couple, excuse me, we had a couple of questions come over that if you're up for it. Yes, Natika is asking, competing while defending is a tall order. How does one do this when the company is not resource rich?
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by competing. Competing while defending is actually is the entire battle. If the concern is competing with the ecosystem, that's an interesting challenge. It's really around strategic bets. But I think the fact that we are all resource constrained is actually the reason why these ecosystem partnerships are so important, because you're able to get a massive yield out of those partnerships. If I use a sort of a software engineering analogy, there's a lot of base layers of an architecture that we used to all build as software engineers to be able to get product out into the marketplace. And thinking in terms of a business architecture, not just the technology, but all the components of business, an ecosystem, set of ecosystem partners can actually drive the pieces necessary to displace a lot of what we've done in the past as companies, right? And so that allows us to free up what maybe trapped costs, tech debt, things like these, that the ecosystem can essentially displace. And so by replacing those pieces of your business architecture, that it frees up a lot of capacity. Oftentimes we find clients are surprised, 80% of their effort in driving the business forward is actually locked into the equivalent of tech debt in operations of the old way of doing things. Great question.
Yes, it is. And we have time for just one more. Other questions we'll take offline by email and we'll get back to you. Santosh is asking, what are some of the biggest mistakes that organizations make when it comes to partnering with the ecosystem?
I had a client ask me in a workshop a couple of weeks ago, I don't understand why it matters where we run our applications. We were talking about cloud and sort of partnering with different, obviously this is a Google-centric discussion. It sort of stunned me that the business agility, the things that you can do with all these other pieces of these hyperscaler platforms, the mistake that I see is that kind of a perspective. It's just sort of a utility I plug into someplace. Why does it matter if I plug into that hole in the wall or this hole in the wall to turn my laptop on? And so that one of the big mistakes is thinking about these partnerships as a buying relationship, a buy to sell to relationship. Instead, the balance of trade, the 360-degree relationship, the mutual benefit needs to be the way that companies think about the ecosystem. I would say that is far and away the number one error that I see companies take, is viewing it as a sourcing exercise as opposed to a partnering exercise.
Perfect. Then we'll wrap it there. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Tom. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Amy.